Ibrahim Kalin, thank you so much for speaking to us. You recently met the US National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster. Can you tell us what was discussed?
We had a substantive, almost 3-hour meeting where we discussed bilateral issues between Turkey and the United States, as well as regional issues, Syria, Iraq, the fight against terrorism, the refugee issue, a number of other regional issues. I think it was a constructive, substantive discussion ever since General McMaster took up his position. We've been in very close contact by phone, in person, and we try to address the issues that affect U.S.-Turkish relationship. There is goodwill and commitment to improve relations between the two countries, but there are issues that we have to address, such as, for example, the U.S. support for PYD-YPG, which is still going on, and that's a problem for us because PYD-YPG is PKK in Syria. It's the same organization. Everybody knows that.
Except the U.S.
Well, the U.S. does know it too, but because of this policy that they adopted now, they try to portray it as a non-PKK, now under the name SDF or Syrian Democratic Forces. They say, well, it's no longer PYD-YPG, but everybody knows that the backbone of the command chain of SDF is run by PYD-YPG, and the backbone of the PYD-YPG takes its orders from the PKK in Kandil and other places. So we try to convince them that this is a misguided policy. You cannot work with one terrorist organization in the name of fighting another terrorist organization that is Daesh. And another irony is that they said all along that once the Daesh threat is eliminated, they will stop engaging and supporting PYD-YPG.
It's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned this because U.S. Defense Secretary General James Mattis recently came out and said, speaking on the SDF fight against ISIS or Daesh, you know, you've got the distraction of what's going on up in Afrin right now, he said, which is drawing off some of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which have gotten about 50% that are Kurds, give or take. So the US is framing the Operation Olive Branch in Afrin as a distraction. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, it's not a distraction. To the contrary, it actually serves the main purpose of eliminating all terrorist elements and threats in Syria. There is a difference, though, about the emphasis placed on which terrorist organizations take up the priority. We have been part of the international coalition against Daesh. We fought against Daesh, ISIS. We have eliminated more than 1,200 square kilometer area between Jarablus, El Bab, El Rai, and we have conducted that operation very successfully, and there are no more Daesh elements there. We have supported the fight against Daesh in other parts of Syria, but we said that if the United States decides to go with PYD-YPG as the main force against Daesh, we will not be part of it. Therefore, we have refused to be part of the operation in Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, Manbij, and other places. What we are telling to our American colleagues is that, look, we don't have any problem with fighting against Daesh. We do fight against Daesh. The problem is the wrong partners that they have chosen in that fight. And the PYD-YPG is certainly the wrong partner.
So, Professor Kalin, they're not listening to you. They still have special forces, troops stationed on the front lines in Manbij. So, are you speaking to an empty seat, or what gives?
You know, what is ironic is that this is a legacy of the Obama policy. When the Trump administration came to office, one of the things that they said they will do was to reverse many of the Obama policies. I mean, they tried to do this with Obamacare, with Iran sanctions, with opening up to Cuba, and other issues. But unfortunately, on the PYD-YPG issue, they still follow the Obama line because most of the decision makers who were in office during the Obama period are still in office, and they're conducting this kind of devising and conducting this policy. The second irony, as I said, is that they said once the Daesh threat is eliminated, you know, they will stop supporting PYD-YPG. So they're not doing it either. And of course, this has put constraints on our relationship and putting a lot of pressure on the bilateral relationship, creating lots of question marks about American policy intentions in Syria. If the goal was to eliminate Daesh, and now you've done it, Why are you still providing all this military aid and financing to PYD?
It's interesting you say this, and you talk about financing. Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu came out and said this is make or break time for the US-Turkey relationship. Is it that critical?
It is very critical because we keep saying the same thing. They keep doing the same mistake, and you cannot envision a situation where this will not have an impact on our bilateral relationship. That's why, we want to increase these meetings and the diplomatic channels and conversations so that they understand that the PKK presence in Syria is an existential threat to our national security. For them, it might be a tactical issue. For us, it has become a strategic liability, and they are not at the same level. The same goes true for the FETA or Gülenist network in the US, for example. The second issue that creates problems in our bilateral relationship. And again, from the Obama period, we've raised this issue of the Gülenist network in the US, and we told them, look, these are criminals. They are wanted in Turkey. There are arrest warrants for these people. There are court cases against these people, and they still get a free ride in the US. How do you explain this to us and to the Turkish public? And that creates the perception that the US is somehow harboring this criminal group and the terrorists in the United States. So when we raise these issues, obviously, we do this in all seriousness. And they cannot expect not to have all this an impact on our relationship. And at the end of the day, of course, we want to see a way forward with the United States. But if they continue this policy, obviously, everything comes to a very, very critical point.
But Professor Kalin, according to you and the Turkish state, the US is harboring the leader of a terrorist organization, Fethullah Gulen, and supporting a terrorist organization, Syria, the PKK-linked YPG. Is a relationship not already lost?
Well, in diplomacy, you have to work on all of these critical issues, even when you have the major disagreements with an ally, with a neighbor. At the same time, of course, you do not just simply complain about these issues. You do what you have to do, and this is exactly what we're doing in Operation Olive Branch. We have raised this issue of YPG, PYD presence in the Afrin area. We've been attacked over 700 times over the last year. Our cities and towns like Reyhanli, Kilis, and other places have been attacked. We've lost citizens as well as Syrian refugees in their attacks. And we said, look, if you don't take action, we will, and we have. As I said, you continue to talk, but it doesn't mean that you just wait and...
Let me put it another way. Is Turkey committed to improving ties with the United States?
As long as the United States continues this policy of supporting PYD, YPG in Syria, it will create lots of deep problems, long-term problems. But if they revise their policy, if they stop supporting PYD, YPG, there will be ground again for us to work together on the Syria file in a much more constructive and comprehensive manner.
You're talking about the Syria file. I want to bring in some numbers here. And this is a very important topic as far as Turkey is concerned. A lot has been said about this. And the announcement of a SDF border security force, with the Pentagon requesting $550 million for the SDF in the future in its 2019 budget, and $200 million to establish this 30,000 strong border security force. Despite your protestations, the Americans are still funding and arming the YPG SDF along your border.
What is ironic and also disappointing at the same time is that you have conflicting statements coming out of the administration. One minister saying, well, no, actually, we are not establishing this force. Another one is saying from the, Pentagon or somewhere else, no, we are establishing this force. And then, they get into an argument between themselves, and we are watching, like, then the question becomes like, who are we supposed to believe here? Which statement is the true expression of the U.S. policy on these issues? Now, we look forward to the visit of Secretary Tillerson later this week, and hopefully he will bring some degree of clarity to this issue, whether they are really establishing it or not. But regardless of what they say, what matters is what happens on the ground, and we pay our attention to the developments on the ground. As I said, in Afrin we have taken action. In the Euphrates Shield operation a year ago, we have taken action to clear all that area. Therefore, we will do what is necessary to protect our borders.
What message will President Erdogan give the US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson? Point blank, simple, straight message.
On the PYD issue, stop supporting them. You have other partners you can work with. The main problem with
on
US
Manbij?
policy, on Manbij, on just not only the Manbij area, Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, all that area, even the east of Euphrates. One problem, I think the major problem with the US policy so far is that they have chosen the wrong partners in Syria. You cannot fight a terrorist organization with another one. Therefore, what we are telling them, there are other credible, effective, legitimate forces that we can all work with. Free Syrian Army, other Arab groups, Turkoman, non-PKK, non-PYD Kurds, who do not have a voice currently because of the oppression that they've been living under the PYD YPG rule. I mean, it's interesting, and I think it's an important point. When we liberated that area between Jarablus and Al-Bab, more than 150,000 people, Syrian refugees living in Turkey, went back to their homes. And now those areas, Jarablus, Al-Bab, Dabuk, Azzez, all these places, are run by the local people, by the Syrians themselves, Turkoman, Arab, Kurdish, and others. But other people, including hundreds of thousands of Kurds who fled to Turkey, do not want to go back to PYD, YPG held areas because they know that they will be subject to oppression, their children will be kidnapped and forcefully recruited into YPG, PYD ranks, and they will face all kinds of persecution. Therefore, what we are doing, for example, in Afrin, in fact, is helping the Kurds there as well. They will be able to express themselves freely, and they're not related to PKK in any way. And so there are many other legitimate, credible, effective forces, partners that we can work with. By enforcing this PYD, YPG policy, the Americans are also creating lots of problems inside Syria in terms of social cohesion, in terms of protecting Syria's territorial integrity. Because we all say that we are committed to protecting Syria's territorial integrity, but in fact working with PYD, YPG means that, in fact, putting in danger this territorial integrity. Why? Because PKK in Syria is not interested in fighting against Daesh or regime or that. They just want to create their own little state there. Everybody knows that. That's their ultimate goal.
Are you willing to talk to the Syrian regime to stop the YPG?
We don't have any contact with the Syrian regime. When we conduct our operations through Astana process, for example, we talk to the Russians and the Iranians. When we began the Afrin operation, for example, we have briefed all the allies and the partners, including P5 countries, the UN Secretary General, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Europeans, Americans, obviously the Russians and the Iranians. So we've been very transparent about this. Whatever message we give, to Russians, Iranians, I'm sure they communicated to the regime, but we don't have that kind of a
direct contact.
The contact with them.
Turkish opposition leader Kılıçdaroğlu recently came that a line of communication needs to be established with Bashar al-Assad. Should that be done?
We are not in a position to establish any official contact with the Syrian regime because we do not believe that they are the legitimate partner there, especially because we are asked this question all the time, how about the future of Assad himself? We've said all along that, look, he's lost his legitimacy in the 7-year war. He's killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians, turned millions into refugees and IDPs. He's not the person to unite Syria, and he's certainly not the person to move Syria forward.
Will Turkey be okay if regime forces take over Afrin from YPG?
We are not envisioning any situation like that, as we have seen, for example, in the Euphrates Shield operation area. That area was cleared from Daesh. Arab forces came in there, some Free Syrian Army, some other groups, tribes, local people, local leaders, and others, and they're running their cities. So there is no Daesh there, there is no PKK there, and there is no regime there. So it's actually a model, for the rest of Syria, and this is what we would like to see in Afrin happening.
I want to turn your attention to some numbers. On just last week, the Center for American Progress released another poll which charted a continuing trend. It said 83% of Turks view the United States unfavorably, 46% want Turkey to confront the United States more. Do you think in trying to convince the Americans to leave or stop supporting YPG, the Turkish state and the Turkish government is disconnecting itself from what the Turkish people want?
Well, first of all, I think Americans need to pay attention to these numbers. This is done by an American think tank. When they complain about rising anti-Americanism in Turkey, they should be looking at their own policies. They create lots of public anger here, and it's no secret that there are two main reasons for this. One is the US support for PYD-YPG, and the other one is, again, inaction towards the FETÖ or Gülenist network in the US. And this is across the political spectrum. This is not just, say, AK Party base or the Nationalist Party. I mean, from CHP, the Republican Party, to the rest of the society, you see the same trend, same emotion, same reaction to this. Because the simple question is that how come our strategic partner, United States, our a NATO ally, works with enemies of Turkey in both Syria and in the United States? So I think that's a very simple, basic question to which the Americans need to come up with convincing answers. When we try the channels of diplomacy, we try obviously to get this message across. Were
you convinced by H.R. McMaster?
We had a very good, open, candid, and constructive discussion. I think he has good intentions to improve relations. He's committed to improving US-Turkish relations because he knows the region. He's been in the region for many years as a soldier in Iraq and other places. He understands the dynamics at play, but I don't know how much he can do within the system in which he's operating at the moment. But at least, our conversation was based on addressing these two issues, primarily the PYD and FETÖ issues, and we made it very clear to them that until and unless you take some steps in regard to these issues, the relations will not improve.
And what was the reaction?
Well, they've taken notes, and the output.
But what was the sense you got from?
No, as I said, I see goodwill. I see effort, to overcome these issues, and they said that the results of our meeting will be reflected in Secretary Tillerson's visit, and whatever ideas or proposals he will come with will reflect our discussions. And I don't want to prejudge his visit at the moment, or we'll see what he will have to say on Thursday.
The Americans say that the US-Turkey relationship is much bigger than just one issue, the PKK, YPG, SDF in Syria. Is it much bigger?
It's a bigger portfolio. There are many other issues, obviously, we work on together, but to make progress on all other issues, we have to address and resolve this key question. As I said, this is not a tactical issue. It's a strategically significant issue and a threat to our national security. It's almost existential, because every weapon, every penny, every training given to PYD, YPG in Syria ends up empowering the PKK in the region, and they fully understand this. That's why, when we raise this issue, they do not, oppose our objection to that policy. But we would like to see some concrete steps on the ground.
Worst case scenario, if the Americans refuse to move their troops from the front lines in Manbij, will Turkey stop its move towards Manbij and trying to get the YPG out of that area?
Well, we are concentrated at the moment on the Afrin area and securing our border, along the Turkish-Syrian border all the way to Iraq. We'll have to see what they will come up with. As I said, I don't want to prejudge at the moment.
What I'm trying to get at, can we expect some sort of confrontation
between
American and Turkish forces inside Syria?
We don't want that. We don't want a military confrontation. We don't want a military confrontation with Americans or with Russians or with Iranians. We are focused on eliminating our border from all these terrorist elements, whether it's Daesh or YPG, PYD, because we have to protect our own citizens.
And if that means taking on the YPG in Manbij with the Americans there...
We will see, as I said. I don't want to prejudge at the moment.
But it's a possibility.
Look, I cannot speak hypothetically. I'm speaking on behalf of the state here. So you can come up with all kinds of scenarios, but I have to look at the facts and the developments on the ground on a daily basis.
You mentioned Russia, you mentioned Iran. Recently, we saw Israel go into southern Syria and attack targets, some of which were Iranian. We also saw clashes between the Americans and the regime. Let's first talk about Iran and Israel and their involvement in Syria. How concerned is Turkey?
Well, what's happening, or what happened over the last couple of days in southern Syria, is obviously a continuation of the impact of the war in Syria. And I think it shows that the longer the conflict continues, the more difficult, complicated it will become for everyone. If Israel gets, involved in the Syrian war from time to time, when they attack, certain targets in southern Syria, but then Iranians respond, or Hezbollah respond, and the regime respond, etc. It becomes more and more complicated. Everybody becomes entangled in this. That's why we've been saying from the very beginning, look, we have to find a way to end this war, end the violence, and find a political transition. Because what I see, which concerns me really, is that it's no longer about Daesh or eliminating terrorist threats in Syria. Syria is becoming a platform, a theater for another regional proxy war between Russia, Iran regime on the one hand, Hezbollah and other Shia militia, and the United States and its supporters on the other. If that is to be the focus of the conflict in Syria, that means that we are in for another protracted war in Syria, where even if we eliminate all these terrorists, etc., this proxy war will continue, and the cost will be very high for everyone, primarily for the Syrian people, and for others, and it will have impact on us also. And terrorist networks like PYD, YPG will try to take advantage of this. So the point is that we have to move the political process as fast as we can, so that this kind of confrontations and fighting and the involvement of other countries will not become the main focus of the conflict. But obviously, I don't know how the Israelis will conduct their operations from now on. President Putin had a phone call with the Israeli Prime Minister yesterday, and they seem to have stopped their attacks. But you never know what might happen in 2 days, 5 days, or in 2 weeks.
So you are very concerned then?
Yes, of course. As I said, we are concerned about the spread of this conflict and the involvement of other countries in the Syrian file, even though it is in the south, doesn't affect our border directly, but it affects the Syria file.
Let's say if it does go to that stage, or the continuation of a proxy war with different proxies by Iran, we've got Hezbollah, Israel might directly interfere, Turkey has its own FSA, the Russians are backing the regime. The peace talks recently held in Sochi broke down essentially with the participation of certain groups, or the invitation to certain groups that was objected by Turkey. How much does Turkey trust Russia to be a neutral arbiter when they're supporting the Syrian regime, or Iran for that matter?
We supported the Astana process because we believed that it will help the Geneva process. The reason was that the Geneva process was losing a lot of heat and vitality, stopped producing results. And de Mistura, the UN representative himself, he admitted that Geneva is not going anywhere because the regime refused at that time, and I think still continues to refuse within the Geneva context, to address the main political issues. So we brought in the Astana process, and we said from the very beginning, Astana is not an alternative to Geneva. It's complementary to the Geneva process. Despite its shortcomings, the last Sochi meeting at the end of January actually brought Astana and Geneva processes closer to one another. If you look at the final communique of the Sochi meeting, there is a clear reference to UN 2254 and the Geneva process. Secondly, another important outcome of the Sochi meeting was the establishment of this committee for writing the constitution. It will be comprised of 150 people, and de Mistura will be in a position to work on the names. And we are suggesting names from the opposition, SNC, and other groups. So we are hoping that it will produce some results on the ground. Through the Astana process, we have also reached a ceasefire in Aleppo, established de-escalation zones, even though they face difficulties on the ground, because again, it's a very complicated terrain.
And Turkey has been Russia says Turkey has been very slow in setting up these de-escalation zones. Meanwhile, the regime has been attacking Turkish positions as well. There's been
That's the main reason why it has slowed down, because our troops faced, fire and attack and by Daesh, by regime, by other forces there. So we are trying our best, to establish these monitoring posts in Idlib. There will be 12 of them. But as I said, the terrain is not a smooth, terrain. It's very complicated. You have more than 2 million people there. You have civilians. You have different groups. It's a complicated area, and we knew this from the very beginning. That's not going to be easy. That's why we have to coordinate this with the Russians and the Iranians in Idlib, and with other partners when it comes to other parts of Syria. But regime continues to violate the ceasefire agreement, the escalation agreements, like in East Ghouta, for example, and other places. So we call, on the Russians and the Iranians to use their leverage on the regime to stop, killing civilians there, because it doesn't help the process that we are trying to move forward.
I'll push this once more. We are still talking about Russia and Iran, or being the interlocutors for the regime. As far as Turkey is concerned, there is no chance, because the regime has taken over a vast amount of territory, using barrel bombs, offensives in civilian areas. You can go down that list, but there is no possibility of Turkey directly approaching the regime in trying to settle the situation, because there is this perception that opposition groups without Turkish patronage would be nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, we don't have, again, any direct contact with the regime, and we don't need to have one. We have this contact with the Russians and the Iranians through the Astana
And you think
process.
that's enough?
Yes, of course, it serves the purpose at the moment. As I said, we are concentrated on the Afrin operation at the moment, and securing our border all the way to the Iraqi border. And we are establishing these military posts in Idlib, and the Jarablus area is secure at the moment. So, I mean, in terms of securing all these areas, I think we are doing our best and getting some results on the ground. But again, I mean, there is no magic formula at the moment. It's, as I said, it's a very complicated situation with different dynamics at play.
And that has also led some to believe that the reason why Turkey is going in slow, on the one hand, is to minimize civilian casualties. On the other hand, some media outlets said Turkish offensive has led to some civilian casualties. What is your take on that?
Our record on the civilian issue is very clear. If you look at the Euphrates Shield operation, we have avoided civilian casualties there. We have cleared that area and returned the land back to the local people. We will do the same in Afrin. Now, when we began the Euphrates Shield operation, we were asked the same questions. How long the operation will continue, how are you going to avoid the civilian casualties, and so on and so forth. And I think our record is very clear there. You can go and study this in detail. The reason why the Euphrates Shield operation took longer than planned was precisely because of the care that was given to avoiding civilian casualties. We are doing exactly the same thing. Much of what you hear in the international media or some media outlets about civilian casualties is fed by PKK propaganda. They want to project a picture where, in fact, their own terrorists and militants killed in battle are presented as civilians. I mean, we have seen this propaganda game before. Therefore, we don't. We ask everybody, the viewers, to be very careful about this when they hear this kind of report. As I said, 99% of the time, it's coming from PKK propaganda. Sometimes it's disappointing to see that mainstream media picks up this just to make a point of criticism against Turkey, but they're doing a disservice to their profession when they listen to this kind of propaganda. They should be looking at the facts on the ground, our statements and the numbers and the pictures and everything is out there.
Finally, Rex Tillerson has visited. Let's assume Rex Tillerson has met President Erdogan. The trip has gone. U.S. officials have done their shuttle diplomacy. After the visit, what is the best case scenario for Turkey and the worst case scenario for Turkey-U.S. relations?
The best case scenario is for the U.S. to move YPG, PYD out of Manbij, as they promised to us, move them to the east of Euphrates, so that we have a stable area with local people, because Manbij, at the end of the day, is an Arab town, and the Arabs can go and take care of their own, and we can provide safety and security for them, as we did in the Jarablus area. And we continue, obviously, the Afrin operation, and we expect all of our allies support us in our effort to eliminate all terrorist elements from our border.
And
all
you
the way
will also
into
safeguard Kurdish civilians of Kurdish origin in Afrin and elsewhere as well.
Exactly. As I said, there are hundreds of thousands of Kurds who do not share PKK's, PYD's, Marxist-Leninist ideology, who have been suffering from their oppression. And you will see, once they're liberated, many other non-PKK Kurds coming out and expressing their views, and they will become more visible. They're not even visible at the moment because of the oppression of the PKK. And everybody knows that. Even the Western media doesn't report this because it goes against the U.S. policy.
And the worst case scenario for U.S.-Turkey relations, if this visit doesn't amount to anything?
We will see. I mean, as I said, I cannot prejudge. Well, we'll have to see what Tillerson has to come with, what kind of ideas or proposals he's bringing. We will look at them. But again, I mean, regardless of what they do, what they say, we have our own plans. We are conducting the operation Olive Branch. We are securing our borders. We are establishing these military posts in Idlib. We continue the political transition process through Astana and Geneva. And we coordinate with our allies in the region, from the Gulf to Russia, Iran.
Well, the US can say, we'll do what we want, we'll get the 30,000 strong force, you can do what you want. Will you be okay with that?
No, of course. That's why we've raised this issue over and over again, and we will not accept it, and we will do what is necessary to protect our borders.
Ibrahim Kalin, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.